to give our audience an idea, when do you kind of get involved? Is it from like with startup founders where they're just starting? Is it more towards the later stages of the life cycle of a product or service where it's being adopted by, let's say, you know, 1 million users and like, oh man, we don't know what paths we're walking down. Let's get someone to help us think about this. Give us an idea when you get involved.
Yep. So I think it was actually, I would say it's all life cycles. The common theme usually is actually less the period of the life cycle of product or service development. It's more that someone has had an awakening of, oh, this could end really badly if we don't practice a little bit of forethought. And that could be an initial founder that is like going in and saying, I know that I want to do good, but I also recognize that, you know, technology is a double-edged sword. Or it could be later in the product lifecycle when they're rolling it out and all of a sudden they've had an awakening where they realize, oh, now we're actually starting to see these bad side effects. The common denominator that sort of echoes throughout my career is I tend to go to places that are on fire. And that's not that I'm attracted to the fire, but when something's on fire, that's when people are not happy with the status quo. And I'm definitely not a status quo person. If you want a status quo person, please go find somebody else. But if you want someone that's like, okay, let's go up from the dance floor. I say, like, instead of like being on the dance floor where we're only seeing transactions, let's go up to the balcony and look at what's really happening here. Because I think a lot of times where the disconnects occur in a company is when you're dealing with things that are on a day-to-day transaction, you're almost overwhelmed by the tyranny of the now. And if you really sort of take the time to go up and say, what really is happening here in terms of the incentives, the systems, you'll find that actually it may not necessarily even be your product or service that is problematic. It may actually be either the structural incentives, the lack of that you haven't spent time to develop trust with your community or stakeholders that you're working with, that it's actually some human factors that are influencing the less than benevolent ends. And if you want to have more benevolent ends, you actually have to step up to the balcony. And I tell people, especially when it comes to disinformation and misinformation, you might feel like there's more disinformation nowadays than ever before. Yeah. But actually, if you go back to the 1890s, Pulitzer and Hearst, that's how they made their money, with less than factual headlines. They sold newspapers, and they were doing it because that was a way to sell newspapers. Maybe we're selling clicks similarly today. I don't know. I would just say that that's sort of interesting parallels. So in some respects, disinformation has always been there. It's just that as we've democratized technology, we're also democratizing the production of disinformation, which means that now everybody, not just a few companies and a few governments have to think about it. Now everybody has to be prepared for it.
The way you just described it, it sounds, it's on a human level, a behavior level. But what about on a tech level? Do you see a place where technology is ever going to be able to police or give judgments on disinformation? Because the one thing that I was thinking about is the way information is scooped nowadays, right? Meaning scooped, like everyone trying to scoop somebody like, hey, I think something's happening. I'm going to start putting out information immediately. And the reality is there is no reality to measure that against. Like, what is the truth? Well, if the truth is unknown, then no tool can solve this problem because, we obviously have major events happening right now in the United States as well as around the world. But when these things start happening, there is no truth because nobody actually knows what's happening. You're just, beat reporters on Twitter are just kind of tweeting in what they think is happening. So is there ever going to be a place, or how does it get to a place where you say, hey, we can actually, using technology, because humans have no idea how to stop this, but using technology, we can say we can stop the flow of disinformation. Is there ever going to be a way to do that?
Well, so it depends on what form of society you're living in. If you pick an autocratic society, maybe. It may not necessarily be the truth, but it's the version of truth that the autocratic society wants to tell you. Clearly, I'm not a fan of supporting autocratic societies. But I would say in societies like ours in the United States and around the world in which we still celebrate a plurality of thought, I think we're going to have to get comfortable with the messiness of sorting out, and that the only real solution would be tech that improves our critical thinking. Because at the end of the day, it's actually going to be incumbent upon each of us to be aware of, we need to triangulate. That one single source is probably not going to be sufficient. You're going to have to triangulate different sources. And this is how they dealt with disinformation back in the 1890s and 1900s, was actually finally, critical thinking came in and said, that newspaper that said the Spanish blew up the U.S. ship, maybe it was less than accurate, but that was only 10 years after the fact, which is problematic if you've actually gone to war with Spain, which we did because of disinformation. And so we're going to have to I would love to see technology hold a mirror up to ourselves and says, it looks like, Albert, you're getting your emotions, you're getting revved up here, you're getting angry, or you're getting fearful, and that's the number one way to make something go viral is to make it angry or fearful. So if the tech holds a mirror up to you and says, did you know your blood pressure's up? That might be a way to make you pause and say, oh, someone might be trying to manipulate my emotions to try and get me, engaged in this. And maybe I need to step back and actually say, why am I getting angry about this? And it's hard because how many of us actively go seek out news sites that are different than our existing views of the world?
No, most people don't. I mean, it's I think the Netflix movie, The Social Dilemma, I believe is what it's called. I mean, that's what happens, right? It's like, hey, algorithmically, they want to keep you on platform. That's really what they want to do. I don't agree that there's nefarious.
No, it's not
interest
nefarious at all.
behind. It's like, listen, we're just watching what you do. And I always use myself as my own example. It's like, I like surfing. So I noticed it's not really hard to figure out. The more I spend on that site, the more surfing content I'll get because it just figured it out. Right. And so it really is, we become our own echo chambers. So that's how people that fall into like, let's say conspiracy theories, they call it like going down the rat hole, but it's not, it's actually the same behavior everyone else has. It's just that their interests somehow went down this path, whereas mine stayed at surfing, yours went down this other path. And so you just got fed more content that looked exactly like whatever it was that you were engaging with. And I don't think companies want to get rid of that because I saw for example, marketers we've had a couple marketers on one of our other shows, Marketing Trends, talk about, hey, the problem is as soon as they take away contextual advertising, you'll realize how bad advertising really is. Now it's totally irrelevant and you can't stand it. It's like, so in a way, we kind of want to be known. We kind of want things personalized. So we as consumers, we're also part of the problem, right? Because we want contextualized content. Otherwise, we don't like the platforms.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, so that's where, again, you have to go up to the balcony and say, if you're absolutely right. You've identified that I don't think any company is trying to intentionally polarize us. But what happens is if they tell the algorithm optimize for engagement, the reality is human nature is optimized when it's one group is angry in response to another group that's angry. And so it's the wildfire that never dies out. It just bounces back and forth. Yeah. And so that's where the tech companies can honestly say, like, we're not trying to polarize the world. We're just trying to optimize for engagement. It just happens to be that one of these interesting evolutionary flaws in human behavior is, we respond to that tiger in the grass that either is going to come right for us or is threatening us. We don't respond to, oh, look at that nice ray of sunlight. And so to me, the big question of the decade ahead is, how can we use tech to help both individuals and groups identify, I'll say, the flaws or weaknesses of humans and mitigate that? Because another example, the more something is repeated, even if it's not true, the more likely you are going to be willing to accept it's true. I mean, this is marketing, this is advertisement. Yeah. And the question is that's just because in 15,000 years ago, the more we saw something, the more familiar we got with it and the more willing we were to accept it. But, now in political rhetoric, as well as other disinformation campaigns, in some respects, the trouble of fighting disinformation is you have to come out and say, that's not true. Well, you just aired it. And so in some respects, by trying to combat it, you've actually made more people likely to believe it, even as you said, that's not true. And so the way we're going to eventually solve this is tech that holds a mirror up to ourselves and our communities. I also would like to sort of figure out what is the tech equivalent of digital pen pals? Because if we can begin to link people with people who are different, almost like, and I've seen this work, and they actually did a program with students in Palestine, students in Israel. They obviously had to translate the letters, but they had letters going back and forth. And they did this electronically. And it wasn't revealed until about 9 months in that, by the way, you are now corresponding with someone who is actually from what you would consider to be not so friendly towards you. And that changes their mindset because they've now been engaging them. I would love to see in the United States, what if we had an internal Peace Corps where we actually exchange people from rural and urban areas or things like that and actually allow them to either, through tech, blog about their experiences and air about their experiences, or even virtually, like, what is it like to spend another week in someone else's shoes? That might increase our empathy, which could be an interesting counter to things getting polarized.
Hey, thanks for watching. This segment is brought to us by Salesforce Platform. Visit salesforce.com/newsletter to discover timely insights and useful tips tailored to your role. Subscribe to this channel and get more great IT and tech interviews with top industry leaders.